Greetings hobbyists, this is Artisans of Vol. In this video we're going to have a look at how we can make impact hits on shields. Firstly, I've been told that these videos were getting a bit quiet on the sound. I've had a fiddle and hopefully this is going to be back to the normal sound quality. Please do let me know if it's not in the comments section and I'll have a fiddle some more. And now onto the video. So this was actually discovered quite by accident. I also can't remember where I first saw the video on how to use this technique, and there's probably going to be some overlap there with me throwing in some extra bits and experimentation. I'm going to have a look around for it, and then I'll post a link in the description so you can watch that video as well. And all credit to whoever did it, it's obviously stuck in my mind. I just can't remember who of the great creators that I watched that this was. Second, this was actually me trying to do something else. I'll talk about that a bit later, and I actually sort of failed on that, but came up with this, which is arguably better. So what we're going to do is we're going to be using a tool called the warp tool, or the warp modifier. So what I'm going to do is bring in a plane. We need a plane for this. Let's just scale that up a little bit, Control and A to apply the scale, and we need to have this subdivided. So I'm going to go into edge mode, A to select all the edges, Control and E, and let's subdivide that, and then I'm going to come in here and up that to, I don't know, 50, something like that. I might actually go to 100 and see what that looks like. But we'll probably have to subdivide this using a subdivision surface modifier later. We'll talk about that as it comes to it. So back into object mode, and we're going to start with, well, the thing hitting our shield. So I'm going to Control and A, mesh, and bring in a cylinder, and then I'm going to S to scale that down, and S and then Z to scale it in the Z axis. So this is going to be our sort of hit, our laser that's coming in. And to make it a bit more laser-like, I'm going to select those edges and then press S to shrink them in, so it's got almost like this sort of end to the laser as it's sort of coming in sort of that way and hitting. The next thing we need to do is we need to put something on the tip of this. It can be anything really. I'm just going to use an empty, so Control A and then empty, and I'm just going to select a sphere. I quite like that, I just like the look of it. S to scale that in, and then G and Z that up. And I should just Control and A and apply the scales of those as well, just in case it makes a difference. And I think it does actually make a bit of a difference to this. So let's go through making this effect. The first thing we need to do is bring in the modifier. So modifier panel, add modifier, and we want the warp modifier. Now this gives us some options. It says what are we going to warp from and what are we going to warp to, and there's some other options that are going to be very important later on to try and make this work its best. So we're going to have this warping from the hit, so where this is getting hit and it's interacting with our surface, and we want it to warp to our empty, and straight away you can see what this is doing. And what's cool about this, if I go into X-ray mode and select these, is I can move these around and it's going to affect this, and you can also start G and move that up and down to affect how much it's going to be influencing this object. The other thing you can do is you can affect the strength this way as well. You can also affect the fall off, so I've got smooth, you could have something like root or linear or whatever. I'm going to keep it with smooth for this bit. Inverse could be interesting. Let's stick with smooth for now. And to get this cool sort of shape, or at least the basics of this shape, we need to add a texture. So I'm going to click new here and then click on this panel here to go to the texture tab. We also could just come down here, and I want to change this to a wood texture. And we get, well, this funky wave, which I guess could be useful for things, but we don't want this in bands, we want this in rings, and you sort of see where we're going with this. I'm just going to come in and add a subdivision surface modifier to this, so let's add modifier subdivision surface. We can up that to make it a bit smoother if we want to. I might have to affect this later. So we've got these really cool rings. Now this is actually where I started. I was trying to make ripples, and I actually wanted to make rain. I wanted to be able to add lots and lots of these in, and then each make a raindrop. But you'll notice that this doesn't actually work. You can't do this way. I'm thinking maybe geometry nodes would solve this. Not sure. If anyone's got a good way of making lots of little ripples that are going to be slightly different for rain, or has seen a tutorial on that, please do let me know, because my fiddling is starting to get annoying, and we can start affecting that. Now, here's some details we want. Firstly, how far this goes into the object is going to affect what happens, and you can also sort of tilt this so it's going to constantly go towards this object, because that's what we've set the modifier to be, to go towards the empty, but just moving this in and out will have an effect. Also, moving this up and down will have an effect, as well as using the strength will have an effect. So there's lots of different ways of controlling this that you want to be aware of. The other thing that I want to mention is at the moment is if I press G and go along, this, unless it's perfectly centered, starts to look like trash, because what's happened is this object has got the texture applied to it, this here where we've got the spheres moving outwards, and all this is doing is exposing it. So you can do some cool things with this moving around, but for our idea, this isn't great because we want it to be having a hit, but we might not want it to be directly in the center. Now there is a way of fixing this. If we come back to our modifier panel and we go to our texture and we come to the coordinates, at the moment it's on the local coordinates, which means, well, the coordinates of this object. If we come down here and select object, we can tell it to be centered around an object, and we're going to actually tell it to be centered around this cylinder. And it looks like nothing's changed, but now if I move this, the distortion moves with it, but we can still move in and out to affect exactly how this looks. So if you don't want this dead center, you want it off to the side, coming to our modifier here and changing that texture to be centered around the object coordinates and then selecting the cylinder works. You could also select the empty, but that will have a slightly different effect. I'm going for the cylinder. Now this does look really nice, and I really like this rippling effect. Let's just up that slightly. And this looks great by itself, but I want a little bit more distortion on this. And like I said, this was an accident. I was actually wanting to just copy lots and lots of versions of this, so I was going to make lots and lots of this modifier to make lots and lots of raindrops. But when I did this, instead of actually copying the modifier, I'm just going to toggle my stack so everything's smaller. You can do that here as well to make it smaller for each one. If you don't have these options here for apply all and that toggle stack, if you go to edit and preferences and then go into modifier and click that modifier tools, that's what brings that up. And what I actually decided to do was, instead of having to put all of these settings in again, was to just duplicate this. And if you come here and click duplicate, it will make another copy of this. And this sort of infers itself over the top. And if you start doing things like changing the radius and then changing the strength, you start getting this affecting the original one a bit. And you can start playing around with the original one, and you'll notice it gives you this much more jagged texture. And like I said, this is just a matter of playing with the strength of the first and the strength of the second to start seeing how you want this to be. So for example, you can make it much more varied there, or you can make it less. Like, this is really a lot of playing, and then if you move these objects up and down, you start affecting everything. Okay, you can do the same thing with this one. So this is just like there, I think for me, is where I want that to be. That looks really nice. So you just need to play and tweak with this. I will say I found this looks better if you have the original warp having a strength that's higher than the strength of the second one. So for example, if I put this up to about the same, it looks a little bit too rough for me. But that might be what you want. I mean, if this was an asteroid impact, that would look cool as hell. So it just depends what you want and how you're going to fiddle around with it. So hopefully, I'm just going to undo that to get back to the point that I liked it. So this gives us the ability to then move this around as we want and fiddle and tweak with it. That looks quite nice, actually. Woof. So that's the basics of this technique, and in essence, it's just adding a warp modifier with a round wood texture twice, but man, that makes a cool effect. And I imagine there's some people that are vastly better at doing things with sort of weird modeling techniques that are going to come up with some really funky uses of that, and that should look really fun. I will add, if you've done this and you do want to make a shield effect out of this, a quite sensible thing to do would be to then add a solidify modifier onto this and then up that to, let's say, 1. That might be way too thick at this scale. Let's go 0.2 so that you've got some thickness to this. There we go. So you've got some thickness to this shield when you want to print it out. So that would be a bit of an advice if you want to print something. Make sure you use your solidify modifier. As always, this file is going to be up on Patreon if you want to just see exactly what I've got and you're finding it difficult to tweak around with this and get it exactly the same. You can come and have a look at this file as it is with all the relative sizes and things like that, which can be important. If you just want to support the channel, anyone going on Patreon is massively appreciated. Or if you just want to hit that thumbs up button and or subscribe to help the YouTube algorithm realize that this wants to be shared around, that would also be really appreciated. I just wanted to add that I've gone away and found that original video. It was by Justin on CG Essentials, an absolutely amazing channel. Really do check it out if you haven't already. And there's the link to that original video in the description as promised. Have a great day, guys.